"You're under arrest, Grandpa." He didn't say a word when they handcuffed him, just stared straight ahead, calm, silent, like none of it surprised him. In the courtroom, people whispered. A few laughed. One juror rolled her eyes. To them, he looked like just another bitter old man caught in the wrong fight. But what no one knew, what not even the judge understood, was that the man in chains had once ended a war with a single shot. And the only witness who knew the truth wore 4 stars on his shoulder and was already en route to the courthouse. Before we continue this emotional story, tell us in the comments, from which city in the world are you watching this video today? And if you think stories like this need to be heard, hit that subscribe button to support the channel. We're growing every day, and I sincerely thank you for being a part of it. The courthouse was smaller than most people expected. A 2-story brick building tucked between a faded library and a dentist's office in a quiet southern town where people still nodded at strangers and assumed that uniforms meant authority. That morning, the parking lot was already half full before the sun cleared the roofline. Inside, reporters set up discreetly near the back rows, sensing a story that hadn't yet revealed its headline. The case was local, technically minor. A dispute turned physical at a gas station. No weapons, no blood, just a confrontation between a retired Marine and a younger man who claimed the veteran had threatened him with military violence. It should have been a routine misdemeanor. It should have been dismissed. But something about the man's silence made people nervous. He didn't defend himself when questioned. He didn't explain. He just showed up to every hearing on time, alone, in the same plain shirt and jeans, with a look in his eyes that made the bailiffs uncomfortable without knowing why. Some said he was unstable. Others said he was stubborn. One article labeled him a disgruntled ex-military with a temper problem. No one mentioned his record. No one had asked. In fact, most assumed he was just another veteran who never adjusted to civilian life. That's how people talked about him in town, when they talked at all. He lived alone at the edge of a wooded lot in a trailer with no internet and no mailbox. The neighbors saw him walking at dawn with his back straight and his steps measured, always wearing the same boots, always silent. Some thought he was strange. Others thought he was broken. But no one thought he mattered. In court, his name was printed on a sheet of paper clipped to the prosecutor's file. Daniel Rigg, age 66, former U.S. Marine. That's all anyone knew. That's all they needed to know. Or so they believed. The public defender assigned to him barely looked up from her notes. She'd tried to talk to him before, but he hadn't offered much. No family listed, no witnesses, no alibi, no anger either. Just that same distant calm that made even the judge hesitate before speaking his name. The bailiff escorted him in slowly, cuffs already tight, though he made no attempt to resist. He looked straight ahead, eyes fixed on nothing in particular. He wasn't defeated. He just seemed done. In the row behind the defense table, a few people watched him like he was a curiosity. One man whispered, "Isn't that the guy who yelled at some kid over a parking space?" Another answered, "No, I think he threatened to shoot someone. PTSD, probably." The judge arrived. The room stood. The trial began. It moved quickly. Witnesses gave vague testimony. A store clerk recalled aggressive body language. A woman said she'd heard him mutter something about knowing how to kill. The victim, a man in his 30s wearing a neck brace he didn't need, told the jury he feared for his life when the old man looked at him. When asked what was said, he hesitated, then claimed, "He said he could end me from 800 yards without blinking." The court murmured. The defense didn't object. Daniel Rigg sat motionless, expressionless, unmoved. The prosecutor leaned into his closing statement with practiced confidence. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this man may have served once, but that was a long time ago. What we have today is someone who lives in the shadow of a uniform he no longer wears. Someone who thinks his past entitles him to intimidation. That's not heroism. That's dangerous." He let the words hang, Some in the jury nodded. Others kept their eyes low. The public defender didn't speak. The judge gave instructions. Deliberation was expected to be swift. Bailiffs escorted Rigg back toward the holding room. Cameras clicked. Whispers followed. And no one, not a single soul in that courtroom, noticed the black SUV that had just rolled up to the courthouse steps. The man inside wore a crisp uniform. His collar carried 4 silver stars, and his eyes were focused not on the reporters, not on the cameras, but on the name etched on the docket, Daniel Rigg. The deliberation room door closed with a hollow click that echoed across the now silent courtroom. The jury had been gone for less than 3 minutes when a man in the gallery leaned toward a reporter and whispered, "They won't take long." The judge stepped away from the bench but didn't leave the room, choosing instead to review notes at her desk, as if even she sensed the verdict was a formality. In the far corner, Daniel Rigg sat alone, hands resting on the table in front of him, fingers motionless, eyes steady. His cuffs had been removed temporarily, but the heavy chain still hung from his belt. He looked like he had no intention of defending himself if anything went wrong, like he'd accepted that people only see what they want to see. Outside the courtroom, the hallway began to fill. Someone had posted a photo of the trial on social media, and now local news anchors were setting up just outside the double doors. In the parking lot, a few veterans who had served with Rigg, men who hadn't seen him in years, were slowly arriving, word having spread through hushed texts and unspoken threads. They hadn't come to testify. They hadn't even been invited. They came because something about this didn't sit right. And then came the SUV. It pulled up without sirens, without fuss. The man who stepped out wasn't a bodyguard, wasn't a politician. He was a general. General Samuel Wyatt, retired chief of Special Operations Command. Most civilians wouldn't have recognized the face, but the moment he walked through the doors, the clerk at the reception desk stood a little straighter. The security officer at the metal detector didn't ask for credentials. The general simply nodded once and asked, "Where's courtroom 3?" His voice was calm but absolute. He wasn't here to spectate. He was here with purpose. Inside, no one yet knew he was in the building. The jury hadn't returned. The judge tapped her pen quietly against the bench. The public defender typed aimlessly on a laptop, pretending to work. The prosecutor checked his phone and smirked. And Rigg remained exactly as he had the entire time, unshaken, unbothered, unmoved, not defiant, not proud, just ready. In the hall, General Wyatt walked past journalists without a word. One called out to ask if he was part of the press team. He didn't answer. Another recognized the stars on his shoulders and began recording. The general paused for a moment outside the courtroom doors. His face, though composed, carried something heavy. Not guilt, not anger, something more like respect mixed with urgency. He waited a moment, then opened the door and stepped inside. The judge looked up, confused at first, then immediately rose from her seat as soon as she registered the insignia. The courtroom froze. The jury was still out, but the room itself had changed. Reporters turned their cameras. The prosecutor slowly stood, blinking as if unsure whether he was being pranked. Wyatt walked forward, not to the bench, not to the prosecution, but directly toward the defense table, toward Daniel Rigg. And Daniel finally lifted his head. Their eyes met. No words were exchanged. Not yet. But something had already shifted in the air. The silence wasn't awkward. It was reverent. For a moment, no one breathed. The general stood still, hands clasped behind his back, facing Daniel Rigg like a man about to deliver something heavier than orders. The judge, still standing, cleared her throat softly. "General, can I ask what brings you here today?" Wyatt didn't answer immediately. He looked at Rigg, then turned to the courtroom, his voice calm, clear, and unwavering. "I'm here because this man sitting before you is the reason I'm alive. He doesn't know I came today. He didn't ask me to. In fact, he probably hoped I wouldn't. But I heard about this trial, and I couldn't stay silent. The prosecutor shifted uncomfortably. Reporters leaned forward. One juror, returning from the hallway, froze in the doorway, sensing she'd just walked into something far bigger than the case file she'd been handed. Wyatt stepped closer to the bench, not to impose, but to be heard. 31 years ago, I was pinned behind a crumbling wall outside Fallujah. My unit was scattered. Communications were down. I had 2 wounded and no way to extract. We were surrounded. And then, out of nowhere, a single sniper cut a path open. He didn't speak. He didn't wait for thanks. He just fired. 12 confirmed kills in under 5 minutes. Every shot placed with surgical precision. The last one, through a rooftop hatch at 936 yards, moving target, crosswind. That shot saved my life and the lives of the men with me. He paused, scanning the room. That sniper was Gunnery Sergeant Daniel Rigg. Murmurs broke out across the courtroom, but Wyatt lifted a hand and the room silenced again. I've read the testimony. I've seen the charges. And I'm telling you now, whatever words this man allegedly said in a parking lot, he's earned the right to be heard in a way none of you can measure. He doesn't talk much. He never did. He didn't come back from war looking for parades or praise. But if you think for a second that the man sitting here is a threat to anyone, you have no idea what restraint looks like. He turned to the judge. With your permission, I'd like to speak to the jury. The judge, stunned, nodded slowly. Proceed, General. Wyatt walked to the front of the jury box and took a breath. There's a reason Daniel Rigg didn't defend himself. It's not because he's guilty. It's because he's tired. Tired of being misunderstood. Tired of seeing the world confuse silence with threat. But I know him. I know that when chaos breaks loose, when bullets fly, when no one knows what to do, you pray a man like him is nearby. He stepped back, then added quietly, you don't put men like this in chains. You put them in history books. And then, in front of the courtroom, the reporters, the judge, the jury, and the man who once saved his life, General Wyatt did something no one expected. He dropped to one knee, not out of weakness, not for show, but as an apology, not for himself, but for a system that had forgotten who Daniel Rigg was. No one in the courtroom moved, not the bailiff, not the prosecutor, not even the judge, who sat frozen behind her bench, one hand still resting on her gavel, the other covering her mouth. The jury, already returning to their seats from deliberation, now stared at the 4-star general kneeling in front of the man they were about to convict. One juror wiped a tear. Another looked down, ashamed. The prosecutor opened his mouth as if to object, but the words never came. Daniel Rigg didn't react right away. He didn't look around for validation or offer any sign of surprise. His gaze remained fixed on the man kneeling before him, eyes heavy with a lifetime of things he'd never said. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he rose from his seat, walked to the general, and extended his hand. Wyatt stood, took it, and in that moment, the two men stood face to face, not as officer and sniper, not as witness and defendant, but as something older, deeper, as soldiers bound by something the rest of the room could never fully understand. The judge cleared her throat, voice breaking just slightly. In light of this testimony, and the extraordinary context brought before this court, I am dismissing all charges effective immediately. Her gavel came down, not with force, but with finality. Daniel's chains were removed. This time, no one touched him without reverence. He didn't rush to leave. He turned, nodded once to the jury, and walked down the aisle slowly, each step echoing in the wood-paneled chamber like the final punctuation of a sentence long overdue. Outside, a few veterans stood at attention as he passed. One saluted without being asked. Reporters tried to speak, but none could form a question that didn't sound foolish. Rigg kept walking. He didn't say a word. He never needed to. General Wyatt followed behind him, not as an escort, but as a witness. And as they stepped into the sunlight, for the first time in years, Daniel Rigg looked less like a ghost and more like a man returning from a war that had never ended. Sometimes a hero doesn't wear a uniform anymore. He doesn't march, doesn't salute, doesn't stand on ceremony. Sometimes he walks into a courtroom wearing a quiet stare and worn-out boots, not asking for recognition, just hoping the world will stop misunderstanding the silence he's carried for decades. Daniel Rigg never asked to be defended. He didn't tell his story. He didn't need to. Because there are men like him who believe that doing the right thing shouldn't require applause, who carry their scars privately, their memories quietly, and their honor with a weight most people will never recognize until the moment it's too late. But not this time. Because this time, someone spoke up. This time, someone remembered. This time, a man with 4 stars on his shoulder knelt in a courtroom, not to plead, but to correct something we all too often get wrong, forgetting what sacrifice looks like once the war's over, forgetting that those who saved lives overseas are still trying to survive here, forgetting that silence doesn't mean weakness. It often means strength too deep to explain. Daniel Rigg didn't leave that courtroom vindicated. He left unchanged, because he never needed the verdict to tell him who he was. But for once, the world paused long enough to see it. And maybe that's the lesson we carry forward. Not to wait for medals or ceremonies, but to recognize greatness while it's still walking quietly among us. This story was brought to you by The Veteran's Voice. Before we leave you today, here's our question. Have you ever known someone who never asked for recognition, but deserved more than anyone else? Tell us in the comments what they meant to you, and how you remember them. And if you think stories like this need to be heard, hit that subscribe button to support the channel. We'll see you in the next one.